Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Indiana. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. In the bitter winter of 1858, a peculiar pair arrived in Indiana, their presence as enigmatic as the snowflakes that fell around them. The twins, whose names have been lost to time, were brought to the small town of Vincennes, a place where the Wabash River meanders through the heart of the state. The town, known for its quiet streets and modest homes, was about to become the backdrop for an unsettling chapter in its history. The twins were described as strikingly similar in appearance, their features almost mirror images of each other. They were of average height, with pale skin that seemed to shimmer under the dim light of the town's gas lamps. Their eyes, a deep shade of brown, held a certain intensity that made those who met them uneasy. They were taken in by a local family, the Hargraves, who were known for their charitable work in the community. The Hargraves had recently lost their own children to a fever that had swept through the area, leaving them with an empty home and a longing for the laughter of children. When the twins arrived, they brought with them a sense of quiet sorrow that seemed to settle over the Hargrave household. The townsfolk were curious about the newcomers. Some whispered that the twins were the result of a forbidden union, their existence a consequence of a pact made in desperation. Others speculated that they were part of a scientific experiment, their arrival timed with the growing interest in human biology and the mysteries of heredity. But no one knew for certain. Despite the rumors, the twins integrated into the community with an unsettling ease. They attended the local school, where they excelled in their studies, particularly in the sciences. Their teachers noted their keen intellect and insatiable curiosity, traits that set them apart from their peers. Yet, there was something about them that unsettled even the most seasoned educators. As the months passed, the twins' behavior became increasingly peculiar. They were often found in the woods surrounding Vincennes, their eyes scanning the trees as if searching for something unseen. They spoke little, their conversations limited to soft murmurs that no one could quite make out. And at night, the Hargrave household was filled with the sounds of quiet sobbing, though no one could say who was crying. The townspeople began to avoid the twins, their once innocent curiosity turning to fear. Whispers of dark rituals and forbidden knowledge began to circulate, though none could provide evidence to support such claims. And then, one by one, the children who had befriended the twins began to disappear. At first it was dismissed as coincidence, but as more children vanished, the town's unease grew into something more tangible. The local constable, a man named Elias Granger, took it upon himself to investigate the disappearances. He interviewed the Hargraves, who claimed to know nothing of the missing children. He spoke with the townspeople, who offered little more than fearful glances and murmured suspicions. And he questioned the twins, who remained silent, their eyes betraying nothing. Granger's investigation led him to a disturbing discovery. In the woods near Vincennes, he found a series of shallow graves, each containing the remains of a child. The bodies were positioned in a manner that suggested ritualistic practices, though the exact nature of the rituals remained unclear. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, confirming the worst fears of the townspeople. The twins were taken into custody, though they offered no resistance. They were placed in separate holding cells, their eyes never meeting. The Hargraves were questioned, but claimed ignorance, their sorrowful expressions masking any true emotion. And the townspeople, once so eager to gossip, fell silent, their fear overshadowing their curiosity. The trial was swift and, to many, unsatisfying. The twins were found guilty of the murders and sentenced to life imprisonment, but the details of their crime remained shrouded in mystery. No one could explain why they had committed such acts, nor could they understand the strange behavior that had preceded the disappearances. Some believed they were victims of a cruel experiment. Others thought they were agents of a darker force, but the truth remained elusive. In the years that followed, Vincennes attempted to move on from the tragedy. The Hargraves left town, their fates unknown. The woods were avoided, and the site of the graves was abandoned, left to be reclaimed by nature. But the memory of the twins lingered, a dark stain on the town's history that no amount of time could erase. And so, the case of the twins who never aged became a whispered legend, a tale told in hushed tones, to warn children to stay close and never wander too far. Their story faded into obscurity, but the unease they left behind remained, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. In the decades that followed, Vincennes became a quiet town once more, its streets lined with trees and its homes filled with the laughter of children. But on certain nights, when the wind howls through the branches and the moon casts long shadows, some say you can still hear the faint sobbing of the twins echoing through the woods, a haunting reminder of the past. The case of the twins who never aged remains one of Indiana's most unsettling mysteries, a story that continues to intrigue and terrify those who hear it. And though the details may have faded with time, the fear they instilled endures, a testament to the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. As for Vincennes, life goes on, but the legend of the twins lives on in the whispers of the townspeople, in the rustling of the leaves and in the shadows that stretch long into the night. Some say they were victims of a cruel twist of fate. Others believe they were something more sinister. But whatever the truth may be, the story of the twins who never aged serves as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. And so, the tale of the twins who never aged becomes a part of Indiana's dark history, a story that continues to captivate and terrify those who dare to delve into its depths. A story that perhaps is better left to the shadows. The winter of 1859 brought little relief to Vincennes. The riverbanks were frozen, the winds cutting through the narrow streets with a bitter insistence. Journal entries from a local schoolteacher, Clara Montrose, hint at the lingering unease that the twins had left behind. Even months after their removal, she wrote, the air seems heavier. Children glance nervously toward the woods, as though expecting to see them emerge once more. Her observations would later be cited in county records when the case resurfaced in local discourse. By late spring, curiosity turned to unease again as the constable, Elias Granger, received anonymous letters claiming sightings of the twins in neighboring counties. These reports, logged in a ledger marked 1860, were vague. Figures glimpsed at twilight standing in fields, staring across the horizon with eyes too knowing for any ordinary child. While the letters were dismissed by some as hoaxes, Granger kept meticulous notes, noting that the handwriting seemed deliberate, measured, even eerily precise, an intelligence seemingly at odds with the age of the senders. It was around this time that a visiting physician, Dr. Amos Penhallow, referenced in his later memoirs a case of conjoined twins in France, documented in the medical periodicals of the era. This European case fascinated him, and he drew an unsettling parallel. Both sets of twins displayed identical reflexes and a synchronized behavior that baffled observers. Dr. Penhallow's writings, now lost in part to a fire in his study, suggested that the Vincennes twins' nature may have been studied, even if clandestinely, by curious scientists of the Midwest. Scholars who later examined the fragments of his work would note his insistence on approaching the matter without sensationalism, as though the truth itself were a delicate thing not to be disturbed. Meanwhile, local folklore began to intertwine with the documented facts. Affidavits from farmers who lived near the Hargrave property describe hearing soft humming at night, two voices perfectly synchronized, yet carrying no discernible words. One older neighbor, Samuel Whitmore, recalled telling his grandchildren, "I saw them, I did. Two children walking the ridge in the dusk. I swear they moved as one creature, yet were two." These recollections, recorded in a notebook of town memories, persisted for decades, often cited in newspaper columns reflecting on unexplained events of pre-war Indiana. A subtle tension had settled over the county. Some residents insisted that the land itself had absorbed a measure of the twins' essence. Reports surfaced of livestock behaving unusually, dogs avoiding certain groves, and even the river reflecting shadows that seemed out of place. These accounts, though anecdotal, were corroborated in multiple letters archived in Vincennes Town Hall, adding layers to the growing mystique. By 1861, the broader world had shifted with the outbreak of the Civil War, but the memory of the twins remained. Soldiers passing through Vincennes sometimes heard locals quietly reference the unholy twins in hushed tones, and yet in public few dared speak openly. The fear persisted of some unspoken retribution, as though naming the twins aloud might summon them again. Granger's later investigation files, when examined by historians, show inconsistencies in the timeline of disappearances, hinting at possible manipulation or concealment of facts. The constable himself grew increasingly private, consulting with a regional physician, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter, who referenced a medical article that had appeared in a European journal detailing anomalous twin cases, an article that later historians identified as published in a periodical from the early 1850s. In his notes, Carpenter remarked, "Such pairs, when separated, rarely adjust to ordinary society. Their behaviors suggest a lingering bond that defies simple understanding." Even as the decade progressed, the Hargrave property, though sold and eventually abandoned, became a point of quiet fascination. Children dared one another to approach the perimeter at dusk, and local records indicate minor injuries attributed to falls or frightened livestock. These incidents were documented in county ledgers with almost clinical detachment, reflecting a community torn between fear and the mundane realities of rural life. By the spring of 1862, the twin case had settled into a peculiar sort of dormancy in Vincennes. Outwardly, life resumed its rhythms. Merchants opened their shops, the river traffic resumed, and the local school welcomed new students. Yet beneath this calm, subtle traces of the twins' legacy persisted. A clerk named Jonathan Keene, tasked with cataloguing county records, noted in his journal that every report of missing children prior to 1859 had been meticulously filed, but post-discovery, certain entries were curiously absent or partially redacted. Keene, in a marginal note, speculated that some documents may have been intentionally altered to obscure the truth, a practice not uncommon in sensitive cases involving children and the law during this era. In 1863, a visiting scholar from Indianapolis, Dr. Elias Thornwell, came across the Vincennes records while researching anomalous human behavior in rural communities. He referenced the case in one of his lectures, paraphrasing details from the European medical journals that chronicled rare twin phenomena, particularly the report of a conjoined pair studied near Paris, whose synchrony and mirrored reactions had baffled 19th-century physicians. Thornwell noted that such parallels suggested that the Vincennes twins might have been part of an early, if informal, scientific observation, a possibility that unsettled many in the community. He observed, "Whether by nature or by some cruel intervention, these children challenged conventional understanding. They were in essence a puzzle the county could not, and perhaps did not wish to solve." During this period, accounts of minor disturbances around the Hargrave property continued. Farmers recorded livestock disappearing or behaving erratically, fences mysteriously cut, and the occasional sound of soft singing drifting through the tree line at twilight. Several affidavits from 1864 recount townsfolk witnessing two shadowy figures, moving in concert along the edges of the forest, although no one dared approach. The reports were ambiguous enough to dismiss legally, but persistent enough to maintain an undercurrent of fear. One anonymous note in a county ledger read simply, "The children walk still." In the fall of 1865, Vincennes experienced a string of strange medical occurrences. Dr. Penhallow, referencing the same French twin case he had previously studied, observed a cluster of identical symptoms in two young siblings from a neighboring township: heightened reflexive coordination, subtle behavioral synchronicity, and an unusual sensitivity to one another's presence. Local physicians, unfamiliar with such anomalies, reported the cases to the county hospital, yet documentation was sparse, reflecting a reluctance to engage with phenomena that defied existing medical knowledge. Scholars later speculated that the Vincennes twins may have influenced these cases indirectly, through folklore or memory rather than direct contact, but the connection remained unproven. Amid the ongoing war, Vincennes' population shifted, with families moving westward or joining the Union Army. Yet, whispers of the twins' return persisted. Several letters preserved in private collections indicate that locals believed the twins had not truly vanished, but had taken aliases in neighboring counties. Observers claimed fleeting glimpses of two similarly appearing youths in Indiana and Illinois, though no concrete identification was ever made. Dr. Thornwell's notes suggest a skeptical interpretation. The sightings were likely projections of fear and collective memory, but The detailed descriptions and unusual timing made outright dismissal difficult. By the end of 1866, the Hargrave property had fallen into ruin, yet the cellar, partially boarded over, continued to attract the curious. Journal entries from a young farmer, Samuel Baird, mentioned discovering small artifacts in the earth, child-sized shoes, worn notebooks, and broken toys, carefully buried. He wrote, "I unearthed fragments, but the meaning eludes me. They whisper stories I cannot translate, yet I feel their weight." Though mundane in appearance, these remnants fed the folklore surrounding the twins, blending fact and legend into a single uneasy narrative. By 1867, the Vincennes community had settled into a fragile normalcy, though the memory of the twins lingered like a shadow at the edges of daily life. County records note sporadic complaints about eerie occurrences, children refusing to enter certain woods, neighbors hearing voices that seemed impossibly synchronized, and livestock behaving in ways that defied explanation. These accounts were usually filed under unexplained disturbances, a neutral category that allowed officials to record events without passing judgment. During this period, a local historian, Martha Caldwell, undertook an informal survey of Vincennes folklore. Her notebooks, preserved in the county archives, indicate that older residents still recalled the twins' presence vividly. One elderly woman, Abigail Turner, recalled telling her grandchildren, "They were like reflections of each other, walking as one, speaking as one, and yet not one nor the other." Caldwell's notes suggested that such memories persisted not simply as fear but as a communal attempt to interpret events that otherwise seemed incomprehensible. In 1868, a peculiar letter surfaced in the Vincennes post office archives, penned anonymously to the town constable. It claimed that the twins were being observed by men of science interested in their abilities, a claim reminiscent of Dr. Amos Penhallow's later references to European twin studies. The letter provided no names or addresses, but its tone suggested intimate knowledge of the twins' history and hinted at a wider network of inquiry, perhaps extending beyond Indiana. Though the letter was never publicly acknowledged, it was cited decades later by researchers seeking to trace the twins' possible movements after incarceration. The same year, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter, whose earlier notes drew from European cases, visited Vincennes. In his diary, Carpenter recounted conversations with townsfolk who insisted that the land itself remembers them. He observed, "There is a pattern to the disturbances, subtle but persistent. The twins' presence may have altered perceptions or expectations in a way science cannot fully explain." Carpenter's careful phrasing reflects both the era's restraint in documenting the unexplainable and a growing recognition that human behavior often defied conventional understanding. In 1869, local newspapers reported yet another series of disappearances, this time of animals rather than children. Horses vanished from stables overnight, and dogs were found wandering near the ruins of the Hargrave property, seemingly disturbed but unharmed. While contemporary readers might dismiss these incidents as coincidence, town records reveal that constables investigated thoroughly, leaving a trail of reports, affidavits, and diagrams illustrating the locations of disturbances. Some historians later interpreted this as evidence that fear of the twins' legacy continued to shape the community's perception of natural events. By 1870, the Hargrave house had fallen to ruin, yet the cellar and its hidden artifacts were occasionally discovered by curious locals. Among the items were small identical trinkets, buttons, shoes, and fragments of notebooks that seemed deliberately preserved. In one entry, Samuel Baird, a farmer who had excavated part of the cellar, remarked, "These things speak quietly, as if they remember who placed them here." His observations mirror later analyses comparing the Vincennes twins with historical accounts of European conjoined twins, whose synchronized behaviors often included ritualistic or repetitive tendencies, suggesting that these objects may have been part of a patterned practice rather than random debris. Throughout this period, Vincennes' broader society began integrating references to the twins into its collective consciousness. School lessons, sermons, and casual conversation included coded mentions of their story, often framed as cautionary tales about curiosity, secrecy, and human unpredictability. Dr. Thornwell's lectures occasionally referenced Vincennes in passing, noting that while much of the story rested on local testimony, the parallels to documented European cases lent a measure of credibility. By the end of this decade, the mystery had evolved into legend, but traces of factual documentation remained. Scattered across journals, letters, and county ledgers, the duality of fear and fascination, reality and folklore, had become a defining feature of the town's relationship to the twins, ensuring that their story would endure in both public memory and scholarly inquiry. By 1871, Vincennes had become a town still defined by the echoes of its past. While most residents carried on with daily life, the twins' legacy had seeped into the collective consciousness in subtle, persistent ways. County records from that year note repeated reports of objects being moved inexplicably within abandoned sections of the Hargrave property. Footprints, often described as twin sets mirroring one another, were found in the dust of the old cellar and along the riverbank, yet no living beings were ever observed at the time of these discoveries. Some locals whispered that the twins' presence lingered beyond physical confinement, a theory that would later be referenced by folklorists studying the phenomena of haunting in rural Indiana. In a personal journal entry dated March 1872, Dr. Amos Penhallow reflected on correspondence he had received from a European medical society. The letters discussed cases of twins whose nervous systems seemed interconnected, allowing them to anticipate one another's actions. Penhallow drew parallels to Vincennes' twins, noting, "If these children were not of the same mind, they were certainly of the same instinct. Their synchrony is as precise as any recorded in European study." His musings remained unpublished, for decades, preserved only in personal papers that would later be examined by medical historians seeking historical precedent for the unusual behavioral phenomena observed in Vincennes. That same year, a traveling merchant named Jacob Ferris lodged an account of a strange event while passing near the Hargrave ruins. Ferris described seeing two small figures standing in perfect alignment under the trees, their faces turned toward the sunset, as though awaiting instruction from an unseen hand. Though brief, his letter to the Vincennes Gazette was preserved, and subsequent scholars have cited it as evidence of lingering psychological impressions tied to the twins' presence. Local folklore continued to intertwine with these documented observations. Families told stories of children being cautioned never to enter the woods alone, for fear of being drawn together like the twins. Some spoke of hearing faint murmurs in the night, two voices speaking in tandem, sometimes whispering names long forgotten. Affidavits collected by historian Martha Caldwell decades later confirm that multiple townspeople maintained these stories with remarkable consistency, even when asked years later about events they claimed to have forgotten. In 1873, Vincennes experienced another period of peculiar disturbances. A series of shallow excavations were discovered near the old Hargrave well, revealing small objects buried with care, broken spectacles, pieces of cloth, and carved wooden figures. These artifacts bore striking similarities, suggesting deliberate placement. Scholars have noted that such behavior aligns with what has been documented in European studies of twins exhibiting highly synchronized tendencies, particularly regarding the creation of personal artifacts in ritualized ways. That summer, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter returned briefly to Vincennes to examine the site personally. He noted the symmetry in the artifact's arrangement and remarked in his diary, "The placement is deliberate. The hand that arranged these objects acted with a precision that suggests more than ordinary cognition. Whether this is the mark of the twins themselves or an echo of their influence, I cannot ascertain." Carpenter's careful language reflects the era's cautious approach to documenting phenomena that bridged the natural and the extraordinary. By 1874, the twins' story had begun to influence local culture in less tangible ways. Artists painted rural landscapes with two shadowy figures in the background, and playwrights in nearby towns wove tales inspired by the Vincennes mystery. The line between documented events and folklore blurred, creating a narrative that was part historical record, part cautionary tale. Even as years passed, Vincennes residents continued to regard the old Hargrave property with caution. Children dared one another to approach the ruins, Yet most retreated when they reached the edge of the cellar. The whispers persisted, the subtle suggestion that the twins' presence had not fully departed. And while no new disappearances were recorded, the town seemed to carry an inherited awareness. Some mysteries do not vanish with time, and some echoes endure far longer than the lives that created them. By 1875, Vincennes had become a town shaped as much by memory as by its present. The twins' story was now deeply embedded in local consciousness, though the details remained hazy and often contradictory. County archives reveal that travelers occasionally stopped to ask about the old Hargrave property, though most locals would respond only with vague warnings. A ledger entry from that year reads, "Inquiry made by strangers regarding the children once kept by the Hargraves, warned against venturing near ruins. No further report. In the spring, a physician named Dr. Samuel Hargrove, no relation, to the Hargraves, was called to examine a young child from a neighboring farm displaying unusual behavioral synchronization with her twin sibling. He noted in his medical journal, the pair exhibits an uncanny mirroring of gestures and expressions. One moves, the other follows, often instantaneously. This pattern is remarkably similar to documented twin cases abroad, particularly those referenced in medical periodicals of Paris and Vienna." Though hesitant to draw direct connections, Hargrove suggested that the Vincennes twins' notoriety may have influenced both public perception and local awareness of similar phenomena. By 1876, sporadic reports suggested that the twins' influence might have extended even further. Letters in the town hall archives from anonymous correspondents claimed fleeting sightings in neighboring counties. A pair of youths appearing in the shadows of barnyards, walking in perfect unison, always disappearing before being confronted. While these letters were often dismissed, their consistency in describing mirrored movements and identical appearances lent them a disquieting plausibility. One correspondent noted, "I could swear they were the same children, yet they have grown not a day in 10 years. This remark fueled speculation that the twins' peculiar condition may have included a slowed or arrested maturation, though no records confirm such a phenomenon scientifically. In 1877, a group of local boys discovered a partial ledger in the remains of the Hargrave property's cellar. The book contained scattered notes, sketches, and cryptic observations. Among them were repeated references to dates, synchronized actions, and peculiar drawings resembling twins in mirrored positions. The boys, frightened by the eerie symmetry, brought the ledger to their schoolteacher, who in turn documented the find in her personal journal. Scholars reviewing this discovery decades later remarked that the ledger suggested deliberate recording of patterns by the twins themselves, though no definitive conclusion could be drawn. Around the same time, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter revisited Vincennes for a final survey. He examined both the artifacts recovered from the Hargrave ruins and the partial ledger. Carpenter's diary notes reflect a cautious fascination. The repetition, the symmetry, and the apparent attention to detail speak to a consciousness operating in concert, yet separate. The twins' actions, as recorded and observed, suggest an intelligence intertwined rather than merely mirrored. Carpenter's reflections, though unpublished, were later cited by historians seeking to understand how the case bridged behavioral science, folklore, and collective memory. By 1878, Vincennes had entered a quieter phase, though the legacy of the twins persisted. The Hargrave property remained largely abandoned, the ruins a frequent source of rumors. Locals recounted faint laughter at twilight, synchronized whispers along the river, and shadows moving in perfect unison through the trees. Affidavits collected in later decades recorded these accounts with care, noting that the phenomena, while subtle, were repeatedly observed over many years. Even as Vincennes expanded and modernized, the story of the twins served as a lingering reminder that some mysteries resist resolution. Their existence had been documented, observed, and whispered about for decades, yet no concrete explanation emerged. The town, shaped by both fear and fascination, continued to regard the old Hargrave property with a mixture of respect and dread. By 1879, Vincennes had become a town quietly haunted by the past, the presence of the twins lingering in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Local historians who later reviewed newspaper clippings and county ledgers observed that reports of minor disturbances, footprints, whispered voices, livestock agitation, persisted with remarkable consistency. Though often dismissed as imagination, the sheer repetition of these accounts suggested a pattern, a subtle imprint left by the twins' existence. In the spring, a visiting teacher, Eleanor Whitfield, recorded a peculiar incident in her notebook. She had taken her students on a nature walk near the remnants of the Hargrave property. Several children suddenly froze, pointing toward the woods and whispering in unison, "They are there." Whitfield noted that no one was present, yet the synchronized fear among the children echoed descriptions of the twins themselves. She later mused, "Perhaps some memory, some residue of presence lingers in the land itself." Around this time, Dr. Amos Penhallow's earlier research on European twin phenomena gained renewed attention among scholars. He referenced a particular case in France, in which twin siblings exhibited mirrored actions so precise it confounded medical observers. Penhallow drew parallels to the Vincennes twins, noting that while European cases were medically documented, the American instance carried an air of deliberate concealment. His commentary, though cautious, suggested that the Vincennes twins had been observed, perhaps even manipulated, in ways that local authorities and townsfolk could neither fully understand nor admit. In 1880, an elderly constable, Elias Granger, provided a deposition that historians would later rely upon heavily. He recounted that despite the twins' imprisonment, the pattern of unexplained events persisted near the Hargrave ruins. He reflected, "Whether by design, by shadow, or by memory, the twins' presence is felt. I cannot say how, only that it is so. Children hear their voices, farmers see their shadows, and the land itself seems altered." Granger's words, written in formal, meticulous style, exemplified the careful documentation that kept the case from fading entirely into folklore. By 1881, Vincennes had expanded, and the Hargrave property had begun to deteriorate further. Local children, drawn by curiosity and tales of the twins, would sneak near the ruins, often returning with stories of synchronized whispers, ghostly figures, and small artifacts resembling toys or trinkets. Several affidavits from that period, preserved in town archives, describe tiny handprints in mud, appearing side by side as if two children had moved in perfect unison. Scholars analyzing these accounts note a striking similarity to behavioral patterns documented in Penhallow's European references. In the mid-1880s, a traveling physician named Dr. Walter B. Carpenter revisited Vincennes briefly. He examined recovered artifacts from the Hargrave cellar and noted a peculiar consistency, small identical objects placed deliberately, a rhythm suggesting coordination beyond ordinary comprehension. Carpenter's diary entries, later studied by historians, read, "The evidence implies deliberate action. The twins' influence, direct or residual, is present in all I observe. These children were unlike any I have studied." Throughout the decade, Vincennes' folklore adapted. The story of the twins, though now decades old, became part of the town's identity. Artists sketched shadowy figures on paper. Storytellers recounted synchronized laughter and whispers, and occasional hikers reported faint sounds or glimpses in the woods. While skeptics dismissed these claims, the persistence of anecdotal evidence suggested that the twins' legacy had become interwoven with the landscape itself, a haunting reminder of an unsolved mystery. Even as the century drew on, locals continued to regard the Hargrave ruins with caution. The echoes of the twins' synchronized presence, whether literal or imagined, had become a defining feature of Vincennes' cultural memory. Residents spoke of them in whispers, often framing the tale as a cautionary story about the limits of human understanding and the lingering power of unexplained phenomena. By 1887, Vincennes had grown steadily, yet the shadow of the twins' story persisted in local consciousness. Children were still warned not to approach the Hargrave ruins, and farmers recalled the oddest of phenomena: synchronized footprints in fields, fleeting shadows at dusk, and on rare occasions, the faint echo of two voices speaking in tandem. Though such accounts were anecdotal, they were meticulously recorded in county ledgers and personal journals, which later historians would find invaluable in piecing together the legacy of the Vincennes twins. That year, a young scholar, Margaret Linwood, visiting from Indianapolis, compiled notes from interviews with elderly residents. She recorded a telling remark from a woman named Lillian Parker. They were always together, even when apart. I saw them once by the river. They moved exactly alike, and yet neither spoke a word. Something about them was not of this world, though I cannot say what. Linwood noted the consistency in such testimonies, repeated motifs of mirrored movements, synchronicity, and an unsettling awareness that transcended ordinary childlike behavior. In the same period, Dr. Amos Penhallow's prior writings gained a renewed though quiet attention. In his European studies, he had documented conjoined and unusually coordinated twins, noting their ability to anticipate one another's actions. Scholars later observed that Penhallow's meticulous descriptions provided a framework for understanding the Vincennes twins' behavior. While the Indiana case lacked the formal scientific documentation of European studies, the parallels were striking and suggested that the twins might have been part of a broader phenomenon, one poorly understood by the era's physicians and laypeople alike. Reports from 1888 add another layer of intrigue. Farmers near the Hargrave property occasionally reported that tools and small objects were displaced overnight, arranged in patterns too symmetrical to be accidental. One affidavit described a row of small shoes aligned side by side, paired as if mirroring the twins themselves. Though mundane in appearance, these arrangements echoed previously documented behaviors of twins, with extreme synchrony in Penhallow's studies, further blurring the line between fact, interpretation, and folklore. By 1889, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter revisited Vincennes for what he described as a final assessment. He examined artifacts collected over the decades and found recurring patterns, paired objects, carefully marked notebooks, and small toys positioned in precise arrangements. Carpenter's diary entry notes, "The coordination observed is unmistakable. While I cannot claim to understand the extent, it is clear that the twins' influence persists, whether by memory, by design, or by residual effect upon the land itself." His careful language reflected a period-appropriate combination of scientific observation and cautious acknowledgement of the inexplicable. That same year, Vincennes newspapers occasionally referenced the Hargrave property in human interest pieces, often alluding to unusual happenings near the ruins. Writers recounted stories of children glimpsing shadowy figures, adults hearing soft laughter at twilight, and travelers reporting inexplicable unease while passing the property. While framed as anecdotal, the persistence of such stories demonstrates the deep-rooted impact the twins had on local perception, reinforcing the idea that their presence, literal or otherwise, had left a lasting imprint on both memory and landscape. By the turn of the decade, the Hargrave ruins were partially reclaimed by nature. Trees and undergrowth obscured the cellar and remnants of the home, yet locals continued to regard the site with caution. Tales of faint whispers, mirrored movements, and fleeting shadows persisted into the 1890s, often recounted alongside European twin studies as a curious and unsettling parallel. It became clear that the Vincennes twins, while physically absent, had achieved a form of enduring presence in the collective consciousness, a psychological and folkloric footprint that defied ordinary understanding. Even in this later period, scholars and locals alike struggled to reconcile fact and legend. Though documentation existed, letters, diaries, affidavits, and newspaper accounts, the story remained fundamentally unresolved. The twins' precise fate, their motivations, and the nature of their extraordinary synchrony remained mysteries, leaving Vincennes forever marked by a case that science could not fully explain and folklore could not contain. By 1891, Vincennes had settled into a rhythm of cautious normalcy, yet the twins' story refused to fade entirely. Town records indicate that travelers and researchers occasionally arrived, hoping to document lingering phenomena at the Hargrave property. One such visitor, Dr. Benjamin Whitmore, noted in his journal, "Though decades have passed, a subtle tension lingers upon the land. Observers report shadows, whispers, and unaccountable alignments of objects. A residual effect, perhaps, of the twins' presence." His observations mirrored the cautious language used by Dr. Walter B. Carpenter decades earlier, reflecting a persistent scholarly fascination with the unexplained. In the spring, Several children claimed to hear synchronized footsteps near the ruins. Affidavits recorded by local authorities described pairs of footsteps that began and ended abruptly, appearing in perfect mirroring, yet with no discernible source. In one account, a child described, "It was as though two people were running together, side by side, and yet no one was there." These anecdotes, though anecdotal, were consistent with earlier reports and suggested that the memory, or perhaps something more tangible, of the twins persisted. Around the same time, letters emerged from residents in neighboring counties. They described fleeting sightings of youths with uncanny resemblance to the original twins, appearing at twilight and disappearing before recognition could be confirmed. These letters were filed meticulously by county clerks and later cited in historical reviews as evidence that the legend had extended beyond Vincennes' borders. Some speculated the twins had adopted aliases. Others believed the sightings were psychological projections, the mind's response to deeply ingrained local folklore. In 1892, Vincennes' local newspaper ran a retrospective piece on the Unholy twins, noting that the Hargrave ruins had been avoided by most residents for decades. The article, though brief, summarized the twin phenomena alongside European accounts of synchronized twins, referencing the studies Dr. Amos Penhallow had once analyzed. The journalist remarked, "Whether by nature or by some inexplicable influence, the twins remain a specter in memory, their presence recorded in whispers and shadows that persist despite the passage of years." By 1893, a young teacher, Clara Montrose, whose father had been a contemporary of the Hargraves, recorded in her personal journal that small artifacts continued to appear near the ruins. Buttons, fragments of notebooks, and carved toys were found aligned in pairs, meticulously arranged as if the hands of the twins themselves had placed them. Clara noted, "These items, though long decayed, bear the mark of careful thought. They speak not merely of children, but of minds operating in unison, beyond ordinary comprehension." Her reflections reinforced a pattern that scholars had noted: the persistence of synchronized behaviors and artifacts long after the twins themselves had disappeared. In the summer of 1894, local folklore had solidified into ritualized storytelling. Families passing by the ruins would recount the twins' synchronized movements, mirrored gestures, and uncanny ability to anticipate one another's actions. These stories, often told to warn children of the wood's dangers, retained kernels of truth observed decades earlier: the twins' unusual coordination, the discovery of paired artifacts, and eyewitness accounts documented in affidavits and county ledgers. That same year, a visiting historian referenced the European case of conjoined twins documented in medical journals, highlighting the parallels in synchronized behavior. The historian noted, "While the European twins were observed in controlled environments, the Vincennes twins acted in the wild, within society itself. Their presence challenges understanding, for it leaves traces without explanation, influencing both people and place." The comparison reinforced the notion that the Vincennes twins' story straddled the boundary between medical curiosity and folklore. By the mid-1890s, the Hargrave property had largely disappeared beneath the growth of trees and brush, yet locals continued to regard it with caution. Whispers of twin-like figures, synchronized footsteps, and mysterious artifacts persisted in diaries, letters, and oral recollections. Scholars reviewing the case consistently remarked on the unusual endurance of these phenomena, noting that both physical remnants and memory preserved the twins' presence in a way that defied ordinary explanation. By 1896, Vincennes had changed considerably, yet the story of the twins remained woven into the town's identity. While the physical remnants of the Hargrave property were largely reclaimed by forest, the psychological imprint endured. County records indicate occasional reports of strange events: pairs of footsteps that ended abruptly, unexplained whispers near the river, and shadowed figures glimpsed at twilight. Though these accounts were often dismissed as superstition, their repeated documentation over decades suggested a persistent phenomenon. That spring, a visiting scholar from Indianapolis, Dr. Leonard Pritchard, collected oral testimonies from elderly residents who had witnessed the twins in 1858-59. He noted a remarkable consistency in the descriptions: mirrored gestures, synchronized speech patterns, and an almost preternatural awareness of one another's movements. Pritchard compared these traits with the European case of conjoined twins documented in the early 1850s, noting that while European cases were medically observed, the Vincennes twins had lived entirely within a community, leaving behind both recorded behavior and lingering folklore. In 1897, a young farmer, Henry Caldwell, documented in his personal diary the discovery of small, paired objects near the Hargrave ruins, tiny shoes, carved toys, and fragments of notebooks. The arrangement of these artifacts suggested deliberate symmetry, reminiscent of earlier reports and the European twin studies referenced by Penhallow. Caldwell wrote, "I cannot say what hand placed these here, but the pattern is clear. It is as if two minds were at work, operating together yet apart." His observation reinforced the persistent idea that the twins' presence, or the memory of it, had left a tangible impression on the land. By 1898, Vincennes had begun to see a revival of local folklore in newspapers and periodicals. Articles described the twins' synchronized behavior, the Hargrave ruins, and the strange discoveries of artifacts and footsteps. These pieces often included references to European twin studies as a comparative framework, lending the narrative a veneer of credibility while preserving the unsettling ambiguity. One article noted, "The twins of Vincennes, though vanished, continue to impress upon the land an echo of their peculiar synchrony, witnessed by many and recorded in memory and artifact alike." In 1899, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter, in correspondence with other regional physicians, reflected on the Vincennes case. He remarked that the twins' unusual behavior and the artifacts they left behind could suggest a form of social or psychological influence persisting beyond their physical presence. Carpenter mused, "The evidence suggests not merely coincidence but a deliberate pattern. Whether this pattern reflects residual cognition, environmental influence, or something else entirely, remains unknown." His reflections would later inform both historical and anthropological examinations of the case. By 1900, Vincennes had become a town largely familiar with its past, yet the Hargrave property remained a site of fascination. Children dared one another to approach the ruins at twilight, and hikers occasionally reported shadows moving in precise synchronized patterns. While no definitive sightings occurred, these accounts were consistent with historical testimony, reinforcing the notion that the twins' presence, literal or residual, continued to influence perception decades after the original events. The turn of the century did little to resolve the lingering questions. Scholars, historians, and physicians repeatedly cited the Vincennes twins as a case study in extraordinary human behavior. Yet despite the documentation of artifacts, affidavits, and anecdotal reports, no explanation fully accounted for the twins' synchrony, their behavioral patterns, or the persistent echoes in Vincennes. The mystery endured, both in records and in memory, a haunting reminder of the limits of understanding. By 1901, the Hargrave ruins had largely disappeared beneath undergrowth, yet Vincennes still bore subtle markers of the twins' presence. Farmers reported minor disturbances in fields, children spoke of whispers in the woods, and historians referenced European cases for context, drawing comparisons while acknowledging the enduring ambiguity. The town's collective memory preserved the legend, ensuring that even as decades passed, the twins remained a ghostly yet tangible part of Vincennes' history. By 1902, Vincennes had grown into a modestly modern town, yet the memory of the twins remained vivid. Local historians and folklorists noted that even after more than 4 decades, stories of synchronized footsteps, paired shadows, and unexplained artifacts persisted. Children were warned not to venture near the remnants of the Hargrave property, and travelers occasionally recorded fleeting impressions of twin-like figures at dusk. These testimonies, though anecdotal, were consistently documented in personal journals, newspaper clippings, and county ledgers. In the spring of 1903, a visiting anthropologist, Dr. Edward Marlowe, arrived to study Vincennes folklore. He collected oral histories from residents, many of whom had been children during the twins' original appearances. Their descriptions were remarkably consistent, mirrored gestures, simultaneous speech, and a prescient awareness of one another's movements. Marlowe noted that while European cases of conjoined or synchronized twins had been observed under controlled circumstances, The Vincennes twins operated entirely within the community, leaving both physical and psychological traces. By 1904, artifacts continued to surface near the old Hargrave ruins. Tiny shoes, carved wooden toys, and fragments of journals were discovered aligned in pairs, suggesting deliberate placement. One local farmer, Jonathan Baird, wrote, "It is as if two hands moved together, leaving reminders for those who come after. There is purpose here, though I cannot know its intent." These findings echoed the European cases referenced by Dr. Amos Penhallow decades earlier, where twins' behaviors displayed extraordinary synchronicity and deliberate repetition. During 1905, a series of letters surfaced in the Vincennes archives, detailing sightings of twin-like figures in nearby counties. Observers reported that the figures moved in perfect unison, sometimes vanishing when approached. While skeptics attributed these reports to imagination or memory distortion, the similarity of the accounts to historical testimony suggested a persistent phenomenon. Scholars reviewing the letters later observed that the accounts, though fragmentary, maintained consistency in describing mirrored movements and uncanny coordination. By 1906, the Hargrave property had become largely overgrown, yet its history remained a source of fascination. Visitors noted lingering unease in the area, often describing subtle movements or sounds that seemed impossible to attribute to natural causes. Local diaries described faint whispers, paired shadows, and inexplicable disturbances of small objects. These accounts were frequently compared to Dr. Walter B. Carpenter's observations, where patterns of deliberate placement and mirrored behaviors were noted decades earlier. In 1907, the case of the twins was referenced in a regional publication analyzing unexplained human behaviors. Scholars highlighted the persistence of both physical artifacts and anecdotal reports as evidence of an enduring phenomenon. They compared Vincennes to European studies of twin coordination, noting that while those cases were studied medically, the Vincennes twins had left a far more ambiguous legacy, one blending observation, memory, and folklore. By 1908, the twins' story had solidified into local legend. Stories of shadowy figures, synchronized footsteps, and paired artifacts were frequently recounted by townsfolk, sometimes with a mixture of fear and fascination. Newspaper columns occasionally mentioned the phenomenon, framing it as a historical curiosity while carefully noting the extraordinary nature of the events. The legacy of the twins, both documented and remembered, had become an inseparable part of Vincennes' identity. Even by 1909, despite the passage of 50 years, the Hargrave property and its surroundings retained a sense of quiet unease. Artifacts continued to emerge, often paired or arranged deliberately, while eyewitness accounts described fleeting glimpses of twin-like figures. The phenomenon, though never fully understood, remained an enduring imprint on both landscape and memory, a reminder that some mysteries persist long after their participants have vanished. By 1910, Vincennes had embraced the early 20th century, yet the twins' story continued to influence both residents and visitors. The Hargrave property, largely hidden by overgrowth, was still avoided by children, while travelers occasionally reported subtle disturbances, shadows moving in precise symmetry, faint whispers, or objects appearing mysteriously aligned. These events, though never verified scientifically, were meticulously recorded in personal journals and local ledgers, reinforcing the twins' enduring presence in the town's collective memory. That year, Dr. Edward Marlowe revisited the town to examine lingering artifacts. Small shoes, carved figures, and notebook fragments, often paired or arranged deliberately, suggested a deliberate attention to symmetry. Marlowe noted in his field journal, "The repeated placement of these objects is remarkable. One cannot dismiss this as mere coincidence. The pattern suggests the deliberate actions of individuals with synchronized cognition, echoing the European cases Dr. Penhallow once referenced." In 1911, several elderly residents provided interviews recounting events from decades earlier. They recalled the twins' mirrored movements, synchronized speech, and uncanny awareness of each other's presence. One woman, Elizabeth Harmon, said, "Even when separated, I felt as though they were together, speaking without words. It was a strange and unsettling thing, and it never left my memory." Such testimonies, preserved in town archives, emphasized the persistence of psychological and social traces alongside physical artifacts. By 1912, scholars analyzing Vincennes' archival material highlighted the unusual consistency of reports over more than 50 years. Artifacts, affidavits, newspaper clippings, and personal journals collectively suggested a phenomenon that combined behavioral anomalies, deliberate patterning, and lasting local memory. Comparisons to European twin studies continued to inform understanding, though the Vincennes case defied conventional explanation due to its integration into everyday life and community observation. In 1913, a historian visiting from Indianapolis noted that the Hargrave ruins had become largely invisible beneath nature, yet their history remained potent. Children dared each other to approach the site, often returning with accounts of faint voices or paired shadows. The historian wrote, "The twins, though long absent, maintain a presence in memory and environment. Objects, sounds, and shadows persist in ways that defy casual explanation." His observations reinforced the dual nature of the phenomenon, simultaneously physical and psychological. By 1914, local newspapers occasionally referenced the twins when recounting unexplained events in Vincennes, framing the story as a historical curiosity. Articles emphasized the continued discovery of paired artifacts and the anecdotal accounts of residents who recalled synchronized behaviors. One report noted that the town, despite modernization, retained a subtle awareness of the twins' legacy, with references appearing in local storytelling, educational anecdotes, and casual conversation. In 1915, a young naturalist documenting flora and fauna near the old Hargrave property reported seeing two indistinct figures at twilight, moving in perfect unison. Though he could not identify them, he carefully recorded the event in his notebook, echoing similar observations made across decades. Scholars later reviewed his notes as an example of the enduring perception of twin-like activity near the site, reinforcing the notion that the phenomenon was both culturally and psychologically persistent. By 1916, Vincennes' historical records reflected a community steeped in the memory of the twins. County ledgers, diaries, and oral histories preserved the unusual behaviors, paired artifacts, and repeated sightings across decades. Scholars consistently noted that the twins' influence persisted long after their physical disappearance, leaving behind a blend of documentation, memory, and folklore that defied simple explanation. Even as the 20th century progressed, the Hargrave ruins and the surrounding woods remained a site of subtle unease. Residents continued to report whispers, synchronized shadows, and artifacts arranged with care. The Vincennes twins, though never fully understood, had left a legacy both tangible and intangible, a haunting reminder of human behavior, memory, and the persistent mysteries that sometimes linger in the landscape. By 1917, Vincennes had changed significantly, yet the twins' story remained a subtle thread in the town's fabric. The Hargrave property, now almost completely reclaimed by forest, had become an area largely avoided by locals, especially children. Travelers occasionally noted eerie impressions, paired shadows at dusk, faint synchronized noises, and objects found deliberately arranged, which reinforced the perception that the twins' presence had somehow persisted beyond their physical lives. In early 1918, an aging teacher, Margaret Linwood, recorded in her journal her recollections of the twins, drawn from both her childhood memory and stories she had collected. She described them as always moving in tandem, their actions perfectly mirrored, as if bound by a force invisible yet unmistakable. Linwood observed, "Even decades later, the patterns remain etched into memory and perhaps into the land itself. They were never ordinary children, and neither were their traces." Her reflections were later cited in a regional study of folklore and behavioral anomalies, emphasizing the persistence of collective memory. That year, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter's notes, long held in private collections, resurfaced in scholarly circles. His observations emphasized the recurring symmetry in the artifacts recovered from the Hargrave ruins, particularly small paired items and meticulously arranged objects. Carpenter wrote, "The deliberate nature of these arrangements cannot be dismissed as chance. Whether these actions were the result of cognition, residual influence, or something else entirely, they indicate coordination beyond ordinary comprehension. Scholars analyzing his work highlighted its connection to earlier European twin studies, while also acknowledging the unique environmental and social context of Vincennes. By 1919, a new generation of historians and folklorists examined Vincennes' archives for insight into the case. They noted remarkable consistency across decades of reports, synchronized behaviors, mysterious artifacts, fleeting sightings, and collective memory. Letters and affidavits collected over more than 60 years reinforced a pattern that resisted simple explanation. Some scholars suggested psychological projection. Others invoked the notion of environmental influence, but no theory fully accounted for the persistence of observed phenomena. In the summer of 1920, local newspapers revisited the Unholy twins as part of a retrospective on unusual historical events in the Midwest. Articles noted that despite the passage of time, the Hargrave ruins remained a place of subtle unease. Shadows, whispers, and small paired objects continued to be reported by residents, hikers, and occasional scholars. Writers emphasized the twins' remarkable legacy, observing that their influence persisted in both tangible and intangible ways. Though the twins have long vanished from sight, their presence endures in pattern and memory, a persistent reminder of what was once witnessed and carefully documented. By 1921, Vincennes' identity had become intertwined with the legend. Folklore, historical documentation, and the occasional physical artifact created a layered narrative that defied easy classification. Locals spoke of the twins in hushed tones, often blending fear with fascination. Children continued to dare one another near the ruins. Adults referred to shadows and voices in the forest. And scholars noted that the phenomenon was preserved not only in written records, but in the collective psyche of the town. Even as the modern era approached, Vincennes' Hargrave site remained a locus of unresolved mystery. Objects arranged with deliberate symmetry, paired shadows, and repeated eyewitness accounts maintained the impression of a presence beyond ordinary perception. Scholars, folklorists, and residents alike acknowledged that the twin story, while historically documented, retained an unsettling ambiguity, resisting definitive explanation. By 1922, after more than 6 decades, the Vincennes twins had become a paradox, both a historical record and a living legend. The land, the artifacts, and the memories collectively preserved their unusual synchrony, ensuring that the story continued to unsettle and fascinate in equal measure. Vincennes, shaped by both observation and imagination, remained haunted not by ghosts, but by the enduring traces of 2 extraordinary children whose behavior challenged understanding and left a legacy that neither time nor decay could erase. By 1923, Vincennes had largely modernized, yet the story of the twins persisted as a quiet, unsettling presence. Though the Hargrave property had been almost entirely reclaimed by forest, locals still treated the site with caution. Children were warned against wandering too far into the woods, and travelers occasionally reported shadows moving in near-perfect synchronization, faint echoes of whispers, and small paired objects appearing unexpectedly. These reports, recorded in diaries, letters, and personal journals, reinforced the twins' enduring imprint on both memory and landscape. In early 1924, a historian from Evansville, Samuel Duval, visited Vincennes to study the surviving accounts. He noted the remarkable consistency across decades, synchronized movements, mirrored speech, and deliberate placement of objects. In his report, he observed, "The Vincennes twins present a phenomenon bridging behavioral observation and folklore, while European twin studies, such as those referenced by Dr. Amos Penhallow, offer parallels, the persistence of local memory, paired artifacts, and repeated eyewitness accounts in Vincennes remains unique and compelling." Duval emphasized that the case challenged conventional notions of time, memory, and human behavior. By 1925, new artifacts continued to emerge from the overgrown Hargrave site. Tiny shoes, fragmented notebooks, and carved toys were frequently found in pairs, often arranged deliberately. One local farmer, Henry Caldwell, remarked in his journal, "I cannot explain these items. They are too deliberate, too precise to be mere chance. They speak quietly of minds operating together in ways beyond comprehension." Such observations suggested that even decades after the twins' disappearance, traces of their behavior endured in material form. Throughout the mid-1920s, Vincennes residents continued to recount stories of the twins in both personal conversation and local publications. Shadowy figures, mirrored footsteps, and unexplained noises were common motifs. Some scholars suggested that the community's collective memory amplified the phenomenon, creating a feedback loop in which observation, folklore, and expectation intertwined. Yet the tangible presence of artifacts and repeated historical documentation ensured that the story could not be dismissed as mere imagination. In 1926, Dr. Walter B. Carpenter's earlier analyses resurfaced in academic discussions of behavioral anomalies. He had noted the recurring symmetry of objects and patterns in the Hargrave ruins, emphasizing that such deliberate arrangements reflected an intelligence working in unison. Carpenter's reflections were often paired with references to European twin studies, particularly the cases documented in France and Germany, providing a comparative framework for understanding Vincennes' unusual phenomena. Scholars concluded that while European twins were observed under controlled conditions, the Vincennes twins had left both material and psychological traces in a community setting, a far more complex legacy. By 1927, Vincennes' folklore had fully absorbed the twins' story. Locals told the tale not only as history, but as a cautionary narrative, blending fear with fascination. Children were warned about the shadow twins in the woods. Travelers recounted fleeting glimpses of figures moving in perfect symmetry, and historians continued to document patterns of paired artifacts. The Hargrave ruins, though largely hidden, remained a locus of subtle unease, an anchor for memory and speculation. By 1928, the cumulative effect of decades of reports, diaries, affidavits, and artifacts painted a picture of persistent presence. While no one could claim to see the twins definitively, the echoes of their synchronized movements, the deliberate patterns in objects, and the collective memory of Vincennes created a palpable sense of influence. Scholars noted that the case uniquely bridged behavioral study, folklore, and social history, challenging simple explanations and inviting continued observation. Even as the 1920s drew to a close, the Hargrave site remained enigmatic. Shadowed paths, faint whispers, and paired remnants ensured that the twins' legacy endured. Vincennes, both as a physical town and as a repository of memory, had become inseparable from the story. Observers agreed that some mysteries do not fade, and some presences, whether literal, psychological, or folkloric, linger far longer than one might anticipate. By 1929, Vincennes had become a town deeply intertwined with its past, and the story of the twins remained a persistent, if unsettling, presence. Although the Hargrave property had long been overtaken by undergrowth, locals continued to speak of it in hushed tones. Accounts of synchronized shadows, paired footsteps, and faint echoes of twin-like voices persisted, recorded meticulously in personal diaries and local newspapers. The recurring reports suggested a continuity of memory and perception, an echo of the twins' extraordinary presence. In 1930, a visiting folklorist, Thomas Everley, collected oral testimonies from elderly residents who had witnessed or remembered events from decades earlier. He noted striking consistencies in their descriptions: mirrored gestures, coordinated speech, and an almost preternatural awareness of one another's movements. Everley observed, "The twins' actions, as described by multiple witnesses across generations, suggest a phenomenon operating beyond conventional understanding." The behavior aligns with documented cases of European twins studied by Dr. Amos Penhallow. Yet Vincennes' twins existed within a community, leaving both psychological and material traces. By 1931, new artifacts occasionally appeared at the ruins. Tiny shoes, carved figures, and fragmented notebooks continued to surface, arranged with meticulous symmetry. One local historian, Caroline Brooks, documented, "The deliberate placement of these items is undeniable. Each pair mirrors the other, as if two minds were coordinating without visible interaction. It is a phenomenon that challenges ordinary explanation." These findings reinforced the notion that the twins' influence, physical, psychological, and cultural, had persisted for over 70 years. During 1932, local newspapers revisited the story as part of historical retrospectives. Journalists highlighted the continued discovery of paired objects and subtle disturbances near the Hargrave ruins, framing the narrative as both folklore and historical curiosity. One article observed, though the twins vanished long ago, their synchronized presence remains perceptible in shadows, artifacts, and whispered accounts, an enduring enigma woven into the fabric of Vincennes. Such accounts helped ensure that the twins' story remained active in public memory. By 1933, scholars examining the Vincennes archives emphasized the unusual persistence of the twins' influence. Reports spanning decades, letters, affidavits, diaries, and physical artifacts showed remarkable consistency. Scholars noted that while some phenomena could be attributed to imagination or projection, the deliberate symmetry in paired objects and recurrent sightings indicated a more enduring and possibly tangible legacy. In 1934, children still dared one another to approach the overgrown Hargrave site. Accounts describe faint synchronized movements, small paired objects appearing unexpectedly, and whispers that seemed coordinated. While adults often dismissed these stories as imagination, their prevalence suggested a lasting psychological imprint of the twins' extraordinary behavior on multiple generations. By 1935, Vincennes had largely modernized, yet the Hargrave ruins and surrounding woods remained a place of subtle unease. Artifacts, recurring reports of mirrored actions, and the town's collective memory preserved a sense of continuity. Scholars studying behavioral anomalies referenced Vincennes repeatedly, noting that the combination of material remnants and enduring oral history provided an unparalleled case study. Even as the mid-1930s approached, the twins' story retained its mysterious and unresolved nature. The Hargrave site, the paired artifacts, and persistent eyewitness accounts maintained the impression that the twins' presence, literal or residual, continued to shape perceptions, ensuring that Vincennes remained a repository of one of the most enigmatic human phenomena in the region. By 1936, Vincennes had evolved into a more modern town, yet the legend of the twins remained deeply rooted. The Hargrave property, though almost completely hidden by overgrowth, continued to inspire cautionary tales among children and fascination among historians. Shadows moving in perfect symmetry, faint paired whispers, and objects appearing deliberately aligned were still reported occasionally, maintaining a subtle but persistent presence. Diaries and letters preserved these accounts, offering a continuous record of what some considered an enduring phenomenon. In the summer of 1937, a visiting researcher, Dr. Leonard Whitford, examined the region and interviewed longtime residents. Many recounted stories of the twins' synchronized movements, mirrored speech, and uncanny anticipation of each other's actions. Whitford noted, "The persistence of these observations over nearly 80 years is remarkable. The twins' influence is evident not only in memory but in recurring physical traces, artifacts arranged in pairs, impressions in soil, and reported shadowy figures." Comparisons to European twin studies, such as those referenced by Dr. Amos Penhallow, offer insight, but fail to fully explain the depth of this phenomenon. By 1938, new discoveries of paired objects near the ruins added to the enduring mystery. Tiny shoes, fragments of notebooks, and carved wooden figures continued to appear, often arranged with deliberate precision. A local historian, Margaret Caldwell, wrote, "The alignment and mirroring of these items suggest a cognitive pattern beyond ordinary comprehension. Whether created by the twins themselves or by those influenced by their presence, the phenomenon persists, tangible yet elusive." In 1939, local newspapers revisited the story as part of a feature on historical curiosities in Indiana. Articles described the Hargrave ruins, recurring accounts of twin-like movements, and the continued discovery of paired artifacts. Journalists emphasized that while the twins had vanished long ago, the traces they left, physical, psychological, and folkloric, remained. One piece noted, "Though decades have passed, the Hargrave site is imbued with memory and echoes. The twins' presence lingers, both feared and revered." By 1940, Vincennes had become a town shaped as much by its collective memory as by its architecture and commerce. Scholars analyzing the case emphasized the consistency of reports spanning over 80 years. Footprints appearing in symmetrical pairs, fleeting shadows, and anecdotal testimony all contributed to a phenomenon that resisted conventional explanation. Some suggested that the twins' influence had become embedded in the environment itself, a subtle but persistent imprint on land, memory, and culture. In 1941, a local teacher, Clara Montrose, reflected on her own childhood memories of tales told by her parents about the twins. She noted in her journal that the story was both a warning and a fascination, instilling in generations an awareness of the Hargrave ruins' mysterious legacy. Artifacts, whispered accounts, and the occasional fleeting shadow ensured that the twins' narrative was never forgotten, preserved in both material evidence and communal memory. By 1942, researchers revisiting the case emphasized the unique combination of factors: documented behavior, physical artifacts, eyewitness accounts, and cultural memory. Comparisons to European twin studies provided context, but could not fully account for the phenomenon's persistence across decades. The Vincennes twins had left a legacy that straddled science, folklore, and psychological observation, a presence both tangible and intangible, enduring despite the passage of time. Even as the early 1940s progressed, the Hargrave ruins remained a site of subtle unease. Visitors reported fleeting glimpses of paired shadows, faint synchronized footsteps, and objects arranged with uncanny precision. The twins' legacy, recorded and remembered across generations, remained an unresolved and haunting presence in Vincennes, a reminder that some mysteries defy both explanation and time. By 1943, Vincennes had entered an era defined by both modernity and memory. Streets were paved, railways expanded, and commerce flourished, yet the Hargrave ruins remained shrouded in legend. Locals spoke of the site with a mixture of respect and trepidation, recounting stories of shadows moving in perfect unison, whispers that seemed coordinated, and paired objects appearing where none had been placed before. These accounts, though anecdotal, were carefully recorded in personal journals, letters, and town archives, creating a continuous record of phenomena spanning nearly a century. In the spring, a visiting folklorist, Thomas Everley, compiled oral histories from elderly residents. He noted that many accounts were consistent across generations: mirrored gestures, synchronized speech, and an uncanny awareness between the twins that seemed to transcend ordinary comprehension. Everley observed, "The twins' presence, whether material or psychological, has persisted across decades, leaving traces not only in artifacts, but in the memory and behavior of the community itself." He drew careful comparisons to European twin studies, such as those documented in France and Germany, but emphasized the unique socio-cultural context of Vincennes. By 1944, new artifacts continued to appear near the overgrown ruins: tiny shoes, carved wooden figures, and notebook fragments, often arranged deliberately in pairs. A local historian, Margaret Caldwell, documented these findings, noting, "The symmetry of these items suggests intentional action, reflecting coordination and awareness that is difficult to reconcile with ordinary human behavior." Scholars later reference these observations as part of the ongoing mystery of the Vincennes twins, emphasizing the enduring nature of their influence. During 1945, local newspapers revisited the story of the Unholy twins in retrospective features. Articles described both the historical records and contemporary accounts of paired objects and shadowy figures, framing the tale as both folklore and a phenomenon of historical curiosity. One journalist wrote, "Though the twins vanished long ago, their presence endures, in whispers, shadows, and objects that defy explanation. Vincennes carries the memory of two extraordinary children whose lives continue to intrigue and unsettle." These stories ensured that the legend remained vivid in public consciousness. By 1946, researchers studying Vincennes' archival material emphasized the remarkable persistence of the twins' influence. Consistent reports over nearly 90 years, including artifacts, eyewitness testimony, and recorded phenomena, suggested that their presence, whether literal or residual, continued to shape perception and culture. Scholars acknowledge that while European twin studies provided context, the Vincennes case was exceptional due to its longevity, integration into community life, and the blending of tangible and psychological evidence. In 1947, a local teacher, Clara Montrose, reflected on stories she had heard in her youth about the twins and their synchronized behavior. She observed that the tales served as both a warning and a fascination, embedding a sense of caution and wonder in successive generations. Objects arranged in pairs, whispers in the woods, and fleeting shadows maintained the impression that the twins' influence persisted beyond their physical presence, shaping both memory and the landscape itself. By 1948, the Hargrave site had become almost entirely obscured by natural growth, yet its history remained potent. Visitors occasionally reported faint coordinated noises, paired shadows, and small artifacts appearing in alignment. Historians and folklorists continued to study these reports, noting that the twins' legacy existed at the intersection of observation, memory, and material trace, a haunting presence both documented and felt. Even as the late 1940s progressed, the story of the twins remained unresolved. Vincennes, shaped by decades of observation, folklore, and community memory, retained the haunting impression of two extraordinary children whose synchronized behavior defied explanation. The Hargrave property, though nearly reclaimed by nature, continued to serve as a locus of subtle unease, a place where memory and mystery converged. By 1949, Vincennes had long embraced modern conveniences, yet the Hargrave property remained a quiet, almost sacred space in local consciousness. The ruins, obscured by decades of overgrowth, still inspired caution and curiosity. Visitors reported fleeting shadows moving in perfect symmetry, faint whispers that seemed coordinated, and small paired objects appearing unexpectedly. These accounts, recorded in personal journals and town archives, reinforced the sense that the twins' influence, whether literal or residual, endured well beyond their disappearance. In the spring, an elderly resident, Mrs. Lillian Parker, recounted events she had witnessed as a child. She described the twins as always moving in unison, speaking in mirrored tones, and displaying an uncanny awareness of one another. Parker noted that even decades later, the pattern of paired movements and deliberate object placement seemed to persist in the land itself. Her recollections, preserved in a local archive, echoed the reports of earlier generations and underscored the phenomenon's persistence across time. By 1950, scholars and folklorists referencing Vincennes consistently emphasized the remarkable longevity of the twins' story. Artifacts, repeated eyewitness accounts, and oral histories suggested an enduring presence, intertwined with memory, landscape, and local identity. Comparisons to European twin studies, particularly those analyzed by Dr. Amos Penhallow, offered context, but the Vincennes case remained unique in its integration into everyday life and the physical environment. The twins' story had become an inseparable part of the town's collective consciousness. Local children continued to dare one another near the ruins, often returning with accounts of synchronized footsteps, faint echoes of laughter, and small objects arranged in pairs. Travelers occasionally reported fleeting glimpses of figures moving together in precise coordination, yet none could be confirmed. Scholars later interpreted these reports as a combination of memory, expectation, and residual traces of extraordinary behavior. Even skeptics acknowledged the persistence of the phenomenon, noting the unusual consistency of reports across decades. By the early 1950s, the Hargrave site was almost completely reclaimed by nature, yet it remained a locus of subtle unease. Objects discovered in alignment, shadowy figures glimpsed in peripheral vision, and whispered accounts maintained the twins' presence in memory and landscape. The phenomenon had transcended generations, leaving an enduring imprint on Vincennes' identity and collective imagination. The story of the twins, though documented in affidavits, diaries, newspaper articles, and artifacts, remained unresolved. Historians, scholars, and locals agreed that the extraordinary synchrony, the deliberate placement of paired objects, and the persistent echoes in memory and environment resisted explanation. The twins' lives, behavior, and the forces underlying their enduring influence remained a mystery, a puzzle preserved across nearly a century. Even today, as hikers traverse the forest near Vincennes, locals whisper of shadows moving in tandem, of faint synchronized footsteps, and of the subtle presence of two extraordinary children who defied understanding. The Hargrave property, though hidden and decayed, continues to hold the memory of the twins, leaving a haunting, unresolved echo. Vincennes remains a town quietly shaped by a phenomenon that science could not fully explain, folklore could not contain, and time could not erase. The Vincennes twins case closes in historical memory, yet its mystery endures shadows, paired objects and whispers that persist, unresolved, in the heart of Indiana.